Dear friends, today is the World Day for Decent Work. The day where we remind ourselves and each other of the importance of exactly that, decent work. Not work that just pays enough to survive, but work where we don't risk our health. Work that gives us the possibility to provide for our families without having to worry about how to pay for the education for our children. As Vice President of the TUAC and the President of the Danish Trade Union Confederation, the struggle for decent work for all is very close to my heart. We are living in difficult times right now, with the COVID-19 pandemic putting pressure on the economy, on individuals and not least on workers. But we have shown that it is possible to reach agreements between the social partners and the governments that can ease those burdens, that can provide important lessons for the future. I hope that you will have fruitful discussions today and that all of you will leave this webinar even more dedicated to the struggle for decent work.
Welcome everybody for such a very important conference in the International Decent Work Day. We have to think about adapted strategy, and we have to listen our employees. We have to listen what the problem is in our workplaces and adapt our strategy according that.
The COVID-19 crisis is, we know, by far the deepest and most brutal crisis in modern history. This is a crisis that is hitting all of us, but not least the low-pay workers, women, workers in non-standard jobs, and the youth. It is a crisis that pile on many layers of crisis that have been looming for the past 10 years. There is a climate crisis for sure, but there is also a inequality crisis. Again, the OECD has shown all the evidence. I don't know if the OECD has come up with the right recommendations, but they produced a number of reports that shows the uncontrolled rise in inequalities, income inequalities within countries, but also between crises. Clearly, labor market segmentation has been fueling this income inequality. We are still in crisis mode. If we compare to the previous crisis in 2008, it is essential that we don't repeat the mistake of the past, and that governments, for fear of, in the short term, of a rise in government debts, go into the austerity trap. So indeed, we need to redouble efforts for fiscal packages and support businesses. But support businesses should come with strings, with conditions. It should, when you use public money to support business, there should be conditions on quality jobs, on fair wages. There should be conditions on corporate governance. That is, if you give public money to a business, no dividends, no share buybacks. If you give public money to business, no way it should end into tax havens. This is a matter. It is also important to ensure public accountability of the fiscal packages. All of democratically elected parliaments is essential to have an eye on what happens with the money. This is a matter of social justice, but it is also a matter of efficiency. This is a crisis where there are a few big winners. and we have this unresolved issue of the light regulated sector, which is growing, which is the digital sector. There are issues around data privacy, of course, but there's also employer responsibilities, particularly when you look at the rise of non-standard form of workers. On that front, we need to put pressure on competition authorities so that they address market concentration in the digital economy, but also to ensure that competition rules does not go against labor rights. For TUAC, what we call for is for the OECD, for the future of the OECD, the mandate of the OECD to build on the recent improvement when it comes to collective bargaining. That's very important, obviously. Secondly, to ensure that it builds on its competitive advantage of the OECD, which is being able to come in on a single topic from different angles: competition, labor law, trade, investments, to have a comprehensive approach. And third, to stand firm on rule of law and labor rights.
For the Nordic countries, we are also going to revise our forecast up. So in the September outlook, we cover only G20 countries, so we don't have forecast for the Nordics and the Baltics. But now we expect something like between 3 and 5% decline in most countries, a bit better than that for Lithuania in 2020. And the key messages of the outlook, which are valid for all countries, are that the governments have done a lot to try to damp the impact of the initial shock, and it has worked relatively well. And the economy has rebounded to some extent, but there are still a lot of sectors that are running below normal levels, in particular travel and everything that is related to close contact and entertainment, restaurants, accommodation, etc. So the policies need to continue to support the economy, to support firms, to support businesses until the economy is really recovering. And we had some recovery plans that have been announced in many countries, and it's a good opportunity to promote sustainable, inclusive, and green growth, which is high on the agenda of Nordic and Baltic countries. Next slide, please. So this is showing partly why the recession is less severe in Nordic and Baltic countries than in many OECD countries. This shows data from Google showing mobility for retail and recreation. So what they do, basically, they look at the number of people going to restaurants, cafes, shopping centers, etc. And you see the decline. So in red, I have the Baltics and Nordics. And in many countries, the decline compared to normal levels is below 20%. And even the lowest point is not as low as we have seen in countries where you had full lockdowns, like the UK, like France, like Italy. So that's one reason why the Nordic countries are doing relatively better than a number of other countries. Next slide, please. So before going to, thank you. Before going to the details of countries, I want to mention a few other factors beyond the milder and shorter distancing measures that you had in the region. A few factors that are positive for the countries of the region. First, there were relatively few deaths from COVID in the countries of the region, except in Sweden. You also have very strong social safety nets, very strong institutions. That's true, of course, of the Nordics. That's perhaps a bit less true of the Baltics, but in the Baltics, you had really strong support this time. And in particular, I can mention that Latvia and Lithuania set up short-time work schemes that were existing in the Nordics, but not in the Baltics. Estonia set up a wage subsidy scheme. So a lot of support, other measures also, of course. So a lot of support which has allowed to mitigate the impact of the crisis. You also have large trade flows within the region. So since the region was doing relatively well, even though there have been some some restrictions in, for example, closures of borders or things like that. But even though there were some obstacles, trade in the region has still fared pretty well. Also, the region has less reliance than other OECD countries, or especially in Southern Europe, on tourism, which has been affected. And actually, during the summer, many people from the Nordics and the Baltics, they stayed in their own countries, so it benefited the local tourism industry. The Nordics and the Baltics are also very well developed in terms of digital infrastructure and skills of people, and so it has allowed people to work remotely. It is also a big advantage in the current circumstances. Despite spending a lot, the Nordics and the Baltics are going to come out of this crisis with still very sound public finances. So this is a very big advantage. Some activity will disappear or be reduced only temporarily. But some trends will be accelerated, like digitalization, and some activities may change completely. The way we travel, for example, may change completely, or at least for a very long time. So this is a challenge, and the question that is related is how many jobs are going to disappear permanently, how many new jobs are going to be created in the new activities, and what skills are needed for the people to move from old jobs to new jobs. This is a very important challenge for everyone, and of course for trade unions, for companies, for the government, and social dialogue is very important there. The Nordics and the Baltics, they have fiscal space, and they are having some budget support. So this is for what we have seen in 2020. There is more in the budget bills for 2021. The support is a bit less than in G7 countries, but you need to remember that in the Nordic countries, you have also strong fiscal stabilizers. So you need less discretionary action. The recession has been also a bit milder than in most of the other countries of the OECD. So it is still very strong support that is welcome, and this will support the economy and help support jobs too.
A lot of employees lost a big part of their salary because they had to be in solidarity with the employers. And our main task was in that period to save the health and lives of employees, and also to save workplaces. In autumn, we raised the question about employees, because in spring they lost jobs, they lost salaries, and they do everything to save the workplaces. So in autumn, when our economy recovering, we are asking more attention to employees now, because our employers get a lot of money from government, a lot of money from European funds to stay well. And now it's time to do something for employees.
From the end of March, the companies received the financial support. Of course, those companies which were affected by the crisis, by the lockdown, mainly tourism sector, transport sector, but also industry, especially those companies which are in the global supply chains. How about the role of social partners? We were informed about the legislation and amendments, because from the end of March we had several amendments and new articles added to the anti-crisis shield. However, we cannot say that it was a real consultation or real negotiation with social partners. We were receiving documents from the government, and we had 2, 3, 4 days for our opinions, for the documents, which were huge, and it was completely difficult for us. The whole confederation was working to find what's behind, what's hidden in the legislation. And we were working during weekends and in evenings and at night even to give to the government opinion. But what is also important, what we need to underline, what was the source of the support from the government to the companies. The source of the financial source of the support was given from the unemployment benefit fund and from the employers' insolvency fund. The money which was collected and which is built from the workers' salaries, in fact. So we had situation in Poland where companies were supported by the government, but from the funds which are for workers. We had quite good relations with employers' associations. In many cases, we had the same opinions against the government, and we have seen very much similar in the same way the situation in the labor market, and we had very similar remarks or questions to the government. So the situation, the relation between the unions and employers association was quite well.
My brief contribution from the Finnish perspective, I'd like to give an example on how our social partnership has worked in this COVID-19 crisis. And at the same time, however, I will point out that also our well-established social partnership can be fragile. And as soon as on March 18th, so only days after the first government decisions, the central labour market organizations published proposals that they had negotiated. And the main idea of proposals was the following. For employers laying off employees temporarily would be made easier by making the mandatory negotiation process before the layoff shorter. Also, the payment of employers' pension contributions would be postponed. For employees, access to unemployment benefits would be made easier. Laid-off workers would get their allowances immediately without the normal 5-day waiting period. And they would also be eligible for earnings-related allowances with shorter working history than before. And also the maximum duration of these benefits would be longer. And these changes were immediately included in sectoral collective agreements and then in legislation so that they will apply to everyone. And now these changes are, for now at least, valid until the end of this year. What is crucial here is that these kinds of agreements are only possible because, and as long as we have a well-functioning system of nationwide collective agreements. Now this autumn, as we still need national measures to cope with the ongoing pandemic and the economic consequences that are only probably going to get worse, there are serious signs that we may lose this basis of good social partnership that has served us so well, that we can only benefit from the flexibility and the creative capacity of social partnership if we nurture and defend it and defend the necessary institutions at all times.
An important lesson is that both the employers and the trade unions had to bend to meet each other and to make compromises. The first tripartite agreement that we made was on wage compensation for employees and companies that were particularly affected. This scheme gave financial support in the form of wage compensation to companies that refrained from dismissing employees for economic reasons. That was quite important to us. There's no doubt that economies are hit hard by the crisis, as we heard earlier today. And it is also clear that there are many factors that determine how hard different countries are hit. It can depend on the kind of products you produce and export, etc. So it is too easy to say that social dialogue can solve all the problems, or even to say that social dialogue can ensure that less workplaces are lost. There are many other factors at risk here. I think social dialogue has less to do with how hard countries are hit than with how quickly they can recover. And it is our firm belief that systems where the social partners have managed to meet and make agreements during the difficult times also have the best possibilities to recover. The tripartite agreements have ensured a safety net under the labor market, and this is of utmost importance for the individuals that have been helped, but also for the society as such. So we can say today that the damages are serious but not catastrophic, and this is thanks to the enormous effort presented by the social partners and the government. If anything, I think that this demonstrates that strong social partners are the best to find sustainable solutions in difficult times and to ensure stability and maintain the confidence between them. I'll go so far as to say the cooperation between employers and trade unions in times like this is a win-win situation for the companies, for the government, for the social partners themselves, and for society as a whole.
I would say that the pandemic raises two key challenges. The first challenge is to limit the immediate negative impact on economic activity and jobs and prevent the initial shock from turning into an even deeper and longer downturn. The second challenge comes from the fact that the pandemic is exposing and intensifying pre-existing flaws, especially with regard to persistent and high inequality and the lack of decent work. Those at the bottom of the income distribution and those in an insecure labor market position have been hit the hardest by the pandemic, both in terms of their health and their income. Going beyond the short-term management of the pandemic, the long-term challenge is to ensure that labor markets do not only recover in full, but also recover in a way that makes them stronger and more resilient, with decent work for all as the ultimate objective. The economic fallout from the pandemic risks widening existing inequalities. Government policies to ensure economic recovery should therefore address the issue of inequality. And an efficient way of doing that is through social dialogue. Just as inequality can be an obstacle to growth and recovery, social dialogue and social partnership trigger different effects, allowing for a broader sharing of the benefits of growth. So social dialogue has the potential to adjust to new challenges by seeking solutions to issues of common concern. And this is where the Global Deal comes in. OECD research shows that the collective bargaining coverage rate has declined from the mid-80s, from 45% in 1985 to only 32% in 2017. And also trade union membership has declined. It has fallen from 33 to 16% over the last 4 decades. So that's almost half. In a rapidly changing world of work, we need more and not less social dialogue. We need well-functioning social dialogue that can manage technological and demographic changes, the rise of the platform economy, and new forms of work. To become a partner of the Global Deal, it is necessary to make a commitment to further social dialogue, but it is up to the partner to decide what the commitment should contain. So we therefore have a great variety of commitments.
So for us, sustainability is very important, and we have defined it as sustainable transport, which is basically the customer offer, and also as responsible business with parts such as diversity and inclusion, ethics, safety and health, and of course, human and labor rights. To us, the advantage of the Global Deal platform is, of course, that through it we can increase our partnership work to increase our abilities and improve further when it comes to social dialogue. It's also super important for us to use this platform as part of doing the transformation both responsibly and successfully. We've also actually now incorporated minimum standards when it comes to social dialogue and labor relations in something we call Scania People Perspective. And most recently, we have, of course, also have had a lot of social dialogue together with our union colleagues and employee representatives in dealing with the COVID-19 consequences, both in short-term work, but also in handling the economic consequences with the redundancy, where the intimate dialogue between management and employee representatives are actually one of the prerequisites to do this in a good way, both for Scania, but also for all the employees.
Since I started working with union matters at Scania some 12 years ago, the labor relations have really improved a lot. So we still have different interests to consider, of course, that will always be the case. But we understand our different views better, and we have built trust in the organization between the parties. And with that, we find better solutions, both for the business and the people. And as Sofia said, this is something that's been really, really important in this crisis. So what have we done to improve then? One important activity was to agree on some principles for co-determination at Scania. And we decided then that working together is a success factor for Scania. Management and unions are equal parties. The unions are involved early in the decision-making processes. We share the responsibility for joint decisions, and we have joint communication about decisions where it's possible, of course. And the collaborations is based on mutual trust. It's pragmatic and focused on problem solving. And a very important part when we implemented this was that the Scania management not only opened up for union participation in the forums, but actually talked about the importance and what this will gain to those that were responsible for the forums. And we have also gained some efficiency, because when unions are included already in the decision forums, we don't have to have all the meetings when the management explains why this was decided. This we already know. And when it's time to implement and to communicate, we can do that jointly.
Let me first underline that social dialogue based on freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining is the key to decent work. But it has little value without strong social partners. And governments must acknowledge this and place their trust in the social partners. In our experience, this is a prerequisite for sustainable economic growth. So when it comes to social dialogue, the same apply. And you might think that social dialogue is a quick fix, but you can put trade unions and employers in the same room and you will obtain results. But actually what you do need is trust. And trust needs to be built. So in this regard, the role of the governments is of paramount importance in providing for an enabling environment for promoting collective bargaining. And you might think that trust is a scary thing, but trust is actually very efficient. Trust in each other, trust in the civil service, and, believe it or not, trust in politicians and in trade unions.
I think we all realize that we have a lot of big challenges ahead of us, but with fruitful and solid trade union cooperation, with trust between the social partners, we will solve them and work together for a decent working life with decent conditions in our region. Thanks to all our interesting and inspiring speakers, Pierre Habar from TUAC, Christophe André from OECD, and Veronica Nilsson from Global Deal Support Unit of OECD. Thanks to Sofia Wahlne and Lisa Lorentzon from Scania, and to all other trade union colleagues for important and insightful contributions and remarks. I would also like to thank all our trade union colleagues within the cooperation of BASTUN, NFS and TUAC who have made this webinar possible. My last and final thanks goes to all of you who have joined us in this live stream. We will meet again in the work and fight for decent work. Thank you and goodbye.